The Story of a Christmas Story, by Henry Litchfield West, from the November 1919 issue of the Bookman magazine. This is a story of a Christmas story. It is inspired by the hope that it may induce the goodly company of the Bookman Fellowship to join with me on Christmas morning in reading A Christmas Carol, by Charles Dickens. For many, many years, in the early hours of Christmas Day, I have taken A Christmas Carol from its place upon the bookshelf and read it through from beginning to end, from the first line, "Marley was dead," to begin with, to the last words, "God bless us, everyone." And when I reach the page where Scrooge, awaking in the morning after his nocturnal wanderings with his ghostly companions, puts his head out of the window and asks a small boy if he knows what day it is, and the boy explodes with the answer, "It is Christmas Day," always in small capitals, my pulse throbs faster, my heart beats more rapidly, and my eyes weep tears of delirious joy. I would not miss that thrill on Christmas morning for many, many dollars. There is no better way of putting one's soul in complete harmony with the joyous, generous festival. It is impossible to read the story without experiencing a thorough warming of the cockles of the heart. It makes one wish for Aladdin's lamp, so as to command a fortune large enough to carry Christmas into every home. Thackeray had this feeling, for in writing of the Carol, he said it would unquestionably lead to the purchase of everything in all the shops. When I read the story for the 20th time on last Christmas morning, the 75th anniversary of its first publication, I realized that I knew nothing of its background. Instantly a score of questions framed themselves in my mind. When and where did Dickens write the story? Was there a real Scrooge, or Bob Cratchit, or Tiny Tim? Was the Carol appreciated by others as it was loved by me? Forthwith I began a quest which, for nearly a year, has been a delightful recreation. It has led me into many libraries and a multitude of old bookstores. It has resulted in a delightful long-distance acquaintance with congenial book collectors, and, through correspondence, it has carried me into the sacred precincts of the British Museum. Perhaps there are others who, like me, having been thrilled by the conversion of Scrooge, softened by the tenderness of Tiny Tim, and cheered by the heartiness of Scrooge's nephew, will be glad to read the story again in the light of its environment. Some of these days, I hope to make my quest complete. I have never seen the original manuscript, nor even a first edition. Nor have I been able to learn whether the characters were purely imaginary or drawn from life. There are many things yet to be done which are fully worthwhile, not the least being a monograph which will present, in far more detail than is permissible within the limits of this article, the story of the Carol, from every angle. Charles Dickens wrote many Christmas stories. All of them came from his heart. The season of gladness and cheer appealed to his emotional and sentimental nature. He was saturated with the Yuletide spirit, and these Christmas tales literally gushed forth from the wellsprings of his soul. "My purpose," he says, in an introduction to one of the editions of the Christmas stories, was, in a whimsical kind of mask which the good humor of the season justified, to awaken some loving and forbearing thoughts never out of season in a Christian land. We may well inquire, as Gilbert K. Chesterton has done, how it happened that this bustling, 19th-century man, full of the almost cocksure common sense of the utilitarian and liberal epoch, came to associate his name chiefly in literary history with the perpetuation of a half-pagan and half-Catholic festival. Mr. Chesterton's answer to the question is characteristic of his keen analytical mind. He specifies three qualities which explain the hold of Christmas upon the human sense of happiness: the dramatic quality, the contrast of indoor feasting and revelry with the discomforts of exterior wintry weather, and the element of the grotesque. If we study, he says, the real atmosphere of rejoicing and of riotous charity in The Christmas Carol, we shall find that all the three marks I have mentioned are unmistakably visible. The Carol is a happy story, he says, because it describes an abrupt and dramatic change. It is not only the story of a conversion but of a sudden conversion. It is a tale of winter, with its comforts saved from enervation by a tingle of something bitter and bracing in the weather. Lastly, says Chesterton, The story exemplifies throughout the power of the third principle, the kinship between gaiety and the picturesque. Everybody is happy because nobody is dignified. Dickens was 31 years old when, in the early part of October 1843, he visited Manchester. It was during this tour that the idea of the carol entered his mind. His fame had already been established by Pickwick Papers, Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, and The Old Curiosity Shop, and he was at work upon Martin Chuzzlewit. He began the carol while at Manchester, finishing it upon his return to 1 Devonshire Terrace, and completing the task in 5 or 6 weeks. The work was done under high pressure. He wrote to Sir Edward Bulwer-Lytton that while he was writing the story he was so closely occupied with it, that I never left home before the owls went out, and led quite a solitary life. The tale completely obsessed him. He wrote to Professor Felton on January 2, 1844, over which Christmas carol Charles Dickens wept, and laughed, and wept again, and excited himself in the most extraordinary manner in the composition, and thinking whereof he walked about the black streets of London, 15 and 20 miles, many a night when all the sober folks had gone to bed. Ellipsis. To keep the Chuzzlewit going, and to do this little book, the carol, in the odd times between parts of it, was, as you may suppose, pretty tight work. But when it was done I broke out like a madman. Published shortly before Christmas, 1843, by Chapman and Hall, on commission for the author, in 1 volume of foolscap octavo, 166 pages, and containing 4 colored illustrations and 4 woodcuts by John Leech. The story was described on the title page as A Christmas Carol, in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. The preface, dated December 1843, was as follows: I have endeavored in this ghostly little book, to raise the ghost of an idea, which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful friend and servant, C.D. The success of the book was instantaneous. Dickens, writing to Macready, characterized it as prodigious, the greatest, I think, I have ever achieved. All manner of strangers wrote to him by every post, about their homes and hearths, and how this same carol is read aloud there, and kept on a little shelf by itself. Lord Jeffrey sensed the psychological value of the tale when he wrote to Dickens that, you may be sure you have done more good by this little publication, fostered more kindly feelings, and prompted more positive acts of beneficence, than can be traced to all the pulpits and confessionals in Christendom since 1842. Douglas Jerrold, by whom John Leech was recommended as the illustrator of the carol, wrote a most appreciative notice in Punch, and Henry Chorley rendered a like service in The Athenaeum. It was the former review which led Dickens to write from Cremona to Jerrold that, it was very hearty and good of you, Jerrold, to make that affectionate mention of the carol in Punch, and I assure you it was not lost on the distant object of your manly regard, but touched him as you wished and meant it should. The best tribute, however, came from Thackeray, who, while in Switzerland, had received a box of novels. These he reviewed in Fraser's magazine. And now there is but one book left in the box, he wrote, the smallest one, but oh, how much the best of all. His tribute to the story fairly pulsates with enthusiasm. One can imagine dear old Thackeray, his face beaming with smiles and his eyes twinkling behind his spectacles, as he wrote. In fact, one might as well detail the plot of The Merry Wives of Windsor, or Robinson Crusoe, as recapitulate here the adventures of Scrooge, the miser, and his Christmas conversion. I am not sure that the allegory is a very complete one, and protest, with the classics, against the use of blank verse in prose, but here all objections stop. Who can listen to objections regarding such a book as this? It seems to me a national benefit, and to every man or woman who reads it, a personal kindness.